Good morning. We're here at St. Lucie High in the Ignatian Conference Room continuing the Oral History Project as part of the Archives program at St. Lucie High. And this morning we're meeting with Ann Murphy and Jennifer Thomas, two of the ladies who head up the admissions effort here at St. Lucie High. Ann, Jennifer, thank you very much for participating in the Oral History Project, which we're documenting all kinds of aspects of life at St. Lucie High. And I'm going to start with you because I think you came before Jennifer. When did you first come to St. Lucie High, may I ask? When did you start?
I started here in September of 2013.
And who hired you, may I ask?
Anja Schmelter was my boss. And
what position did she have?
She was the director of admissions and marketing.
So she was the director, and then you
Yes.
came on and
Yes.
succeeded her eventually?
Yes, and then she left in 2018, and then I became director of
In
admissions.
2018?
Yes.
And Jennifer, how about you? When did you join the staff?
And I succeeded Ann as the assistant director in July of 2018.
2018?
So I've just completed my 7th year.
I want to begin with your first exposure with admissions and how it's changed over the years. I'm an old graduate, and I know in the old days, the nuns from the numerous grade schools would channel students to St. Lucie High. And in the archives, we have some very interesting correspondence, especially between Father Jerry Sheehan, who was the principal, and many of the 8th grade nuns whom corresponded and recommended. And I know that's a dramatically different setup than what it is now. The challenges of your reaching out to, I mean, there are still Catholic grade schools, I'm sure, but what is the present status of the admissions effort in terms of reaching out to a wide variety of potential students? Ann?
Well, it's funny because when I started as director, I'm kind of like you. I like that history, and
Yes.
especially at SLUH High. It's such a neat thing to look back, and that kind of can inform your going forward. So what I did was I looked at past admissions efforts, starting with Father Houlihan, who was principal, I guess, in the 1970s.
Right.
And Father Houlihan, I talked to him about admissions, and he said at that time, you know, he would go out to schools every week, even in the 70s, and recruit students. And I think what he was doing was trying to sort of ascertain from the principals, who were a lot of nuns at that time,
Right.
what students in those classes were good candidates to come to SLUH High. After Father Houlihan was the admissions person, and he was the principal as well, Mary Mahalski came on board as the first official admissions director, and she coordinated all those efforts. And she told me that, you know, for her, it was so hard because they would get so many applicants that they would have to turn away literally hundreds of students. But again, you know, principals would inform decisions, et cetera.
Right.
After Mary did that, and maybe one or two others, Craig Hannock became the director of admissions. And Craig said at that time, he loved the role, but it was just hard for him to keep up with all of the inquiry, and he did so many other things in the building. But at that time then, they started to sort of what I call oversell the flight, and they would take more kids than we wanted because kids started to kind of decline their offers and go elsewhere. And so that became sort of a normal thing. And then they brought Anja Schmelter on because they were recognizing the demographics were starting to change. We were seeing a decline in the number of boys that we had access to. And so she did a bit more marketing, if you will, in the form of advertising and radio spots and being more proactive about reaching out to schools, et cetera. So then fast forward to us. You know, we started to actually incorporate shadowing into the mix because you never really could come visit at SLUH. And once we started that shadow program, you know, we started to see more kids, you know, come through the building. It's just different now because the principals, some principals really help them through the process, but the principals are limited in their capacity. They don't have as much time to devote, and so they also know that we have full staffs of admissions people to help the kids through the process. And so that's become more of a norm of what the kids are experiencing, that they come to the school, that they visit, and then we give them the information that they need to ascertain whether or not they're a good fit.
And when you came on, were you an assistant, or did you, I mean, were there two people, or were you alone?
It was me and Anja, really.
Because, I mean, then Jennifer joined you later on, and
Yeah,
now don't you have a third member of the staff?
We do. Kara Maze is our
And that's because of the workload. I mean, this challenge of reaching out, like you say.
Yeah.
The shadowing program, how did you initiate that, and how did that work in terms of reaching out to, how did you advertise it?
When I took over, I just decided we have to do this because all of the schools do it. And then for kids to come through and for us to say, well, you can't come shadow here, but you can shadow everywhere else, we needed to keep with the market. So then when I hired Jen, Jen had a lot of experience in schools, and she really put that together. So, and she's done a wonderful job of it, and I'll let her speak to that.
Jen, yeah, please go a little bit, because I know you give tours, and is that the shadowing? I mean, where the parents...
Actually, that's a little bit different. So the shadow
okay.
program is the opportunity for current 8th grade boys in the fall of their 8th grade year to be paired up with one of our current freshmen or sophomores to attend 3 classes, have an activity period experience, as well as lunch with their host and his friends, and then ultimately conclude the tour with an athletics facility tour and an overview of our athletic programming. The reason we created this was because not only were our competitors all doing it for several years, but it was a way to kind of lift that curtain and help dispel some of the myths that exist in the marketplace about who SLUH is and what our SLUH experience is for our students. So the parents will register their sons. I will very intentionally pair them up with a young man who has similar interests outside of the classroom, because it's a given that they'll be going to 3 classes with their host. Ideally, those classes will also align with where their biggest curiosities and interests are, in addition to helping them picture themselves doing the things that they love outside of the classroom as a junior bill, because the young man who's hosting them shares those interests and can help him picture himself doing that here.
Gotcha.
We also have a 7th grade visit that existed preceding my arrival. It's called the Inside SLUH Visit, and that was the only way for families to get on campus during the school day, even as recently as 8 years ago when my son was looking at SLUH. And it was a hybrid of a campus tour and some mini class observations for the 7th and 8th grade boys. Well, originally for the 8th grade boys, and then it transitioned to being for 7th grade families. To see what our school culture was like during the school day. So we take them on a tour, we show them the campus, we duck in and out of different classes, and it's a small group experience, typically no more than 6 or 7 students and their parents at any given time, and that's now in the spring for 7th graders.
I see. Let me ask you, when you started, had the campus expanded by 2013, I mean, to the present limit, or was it still expanding?
No, I mean, we didn't have the Dill Center, we didn't have the chapel renovation.
But I mean, the physical expansion to the fields and the Drury Plaza, was that here?
Oh yeah, that was here, yeah.
Let me ask you this, had that not occurred, and I know, do you think St. Louis U High would have remained here? I mean, my recollection from alumni meetings and that the campus was certainly, I know CBC had to move because they were landlocked there on Clayton Road, and this is a 100-plus-year-old building in it. Is that a challenge? I mean, in terms of not only then but now bringing kids into the city, and now that we have the nice campus, is that a selling point that didn't exist before the physical changes? I
think our campus has always been attractive to families from the tradition and history that it offers. But as we've renovated, you know, I think people are looking at it in a different perspective. It almost, from where I sit, kind of shows like a mini college campus, because the
now
students,
it's very nice.
The students have to really move around a lot, but it's open for them to do that, so we're not, you know, shut down in any way. So I think it's definitely a selling point.
But do you think, had they not expanded, that it would, I mean, that you two and others could have still attracted the students to come here with the limited campus?
Yeah, I think so, because
you?
I think the tradition of SLUH has always been our academic excellence.
Excellence.
And I think that that's still primarily why families are interested in being here. I will say, however, as the migration of demographic, you know, what did we have just 10 years ago? 400,000 in the city, and now we're looking at 230,000.
Right.
As that continues to decline,
Yes.
that far west St. Charles area,
yeah.
you know, we don't really attract kids from there. It's not very simple to get here
Long
for them.
trek, yeah.
So that, you know, that's you know, a challenge for
Yes.
us. However, you know, looking at our demographics, most of our students are still coming from within about a 10-mile radius to school here. So, you know, there's some growth in some zip codes that we've seen, and you know, we still enjoy a really healthy applicant pool.
Well, I think you've done an amazing job, because I know several of the other Catholic high schools, their student body has dropped. That's something I want to explore in just a minute. But I wanted to ask you both about the Jesuit influence. You mentioned Father Houlihan, who was the principal when you came in. Do you get much input? And of course, there's been Jesuit and now non-Jesuit principals in it. But what kind of influence, or I won't say guidance, but do you get, what kind of input do you get from the higher ups as far as the effort at diversity and keeping the school at approximately 1,000 students?
Well, our office reports to Father Stewart, and so
you report directly to the principal.
Correct, and
I
so
see.
he's part of the admissions process. Our committee, our small committee, of course, would include him, our assistant principal, ourselves, a couple other key administrators, and so yeah, I mean, there's a heavy influence for that. You know, and the Jesuit education obviously attracts, you know, families because of its, again, our academic excellence and rigor and reputation. So it's good. We're very fortunate to have the number of priests that we do have here. And I think people are realizing that formation is really key, especially in those years in high school.
One of the things I'd like to explore is, over the years, there's, from way back when I was here, I mean, it was pretty much of an all-white. I think we had one African-American student in my class. I know we did. And now, I mean, there's an African-American population. I understand there's somewhat of a growing Asian group within the school, and that, was that how did that diversity decision, was that something that was discussed not only with the principal, with the Jesuits? How did that all become the effort that it is now?
Ever since I started here, Bob, we've always had a director of diversity. We've had one.
Oh, you always have had?
Yeah, even before I started.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
And so that person really is responsible for coordinating the effort within the building to make sure that those students are here, can transition well, can acclimate to education, et cetera. You know, more and more now, we still have the highest, the percentage of students that are Catholic coming from Catholic schools is still high, but the number of schools we're seeing is shifting to about 50-50. So Catholic schools 50%, and then non-Catholic, non-traditional schools 50%.
I see.
So the kids are coming from all different walks of life. If you would look at our diversity number compared to other schools, I think you would find we would be right at the top. And that is due to the fact that we've been so generous with our financial aid assistance that we can reach a broader range of students. You know, we get a lot of kids from Loyola Academy, our you know, partner middle school. We get a lot of kids from public schools that come. So we continue to work at that and try to identify areas, even non-traditional, you know, sources, not just education or schools, where we can pull kids in from all different backgrounds.
Well, that's what I wanted to also explore, this reaching out to families. And Jen, you were talking about, I mean, not only the shadowing, but, and I know you have tours and that, but in reaching out to the families, what kind of general reception do you get? I mean, Ann's talked about St. Louis, Ohio, of course, has a widespread reputation. at least in certain communities, but I mean, when you go into certain other communities, it probably doesn't have the, I'm not trying to pick on the African American group, but I mean, they sometimes, because we don't have the graduates from years past, how is that effort guided, or in terms of the reaching out, and what kind of questions do you get from families when they're not sure about St. Louis U High?
Sure. When I began here, we had some intentional outreach to families after a formal campus visit. It was really one touch point. And I worked very hard to develop what we call our Parent Ambassador Program. Any 8th grade family that even submits an inquiry during their 8th grade year is provided with the support of a parent ambassador whose family has had a similar background, if you will. It could be a common elementary school, it could be a common geography, it could be a common church or faith life, because as Ann said, we have about 50% of our population coming from outside of Catholic elementary schools. That doesn't mean that they're not all Catholic, that many of them are not Catholic, but we do have a healthy diversity in terms of faith practices and faith life. So what we try to do is have current families provide an informal support mechanism for families who are looking at SLUH to have their questions and wonders addressed by those who are living it in the current day. As far as questions from families, it runs the gamut. How does your son get to SLUH? We live out in the further reaches. What is your son's experience at SLUH? My son is not an athlete. Will he find his people in his place? How do you afford SLUH? There's a lot of different elements and questions that families have that are unique to their own personal circumstances. So in addition to the formal support that they receive from us in the admissions office, we have that informal support where they might feel more comfortable asking somebody who's walked in their shoes more recently as an applicant family and then a current family.
And you mentioned middle schools, and I'm aware that Chaminade, Priory, and now DeSmet have all middle school, Chaminade and Priory for longstanding, and I think DeSmet's just getting their, which, and I think all 3 of those schools, at least DeSmet and Chaminade, and probably CVC, which is a different thing, but have had problems keeping their enrollment at a healthy level. How does that affect your efforts in terms of, we don't have a middle school program, and I don't know if there's ever any plans, but I mean, is that make your efforts more challenging, or how difficult is it because of these middle school programs that at least 3 of the other Catholic boys' high schools have? How does that affect your efforts?
You know, I think the answer right now is I'm not sure yet, because
really?
DeSmet's middle school
just starting
will just start in the fall. The kids from Chaminade and Priory, they do tend to stay there and not, shift, but we do get some kids from there each year. I think what it is more of a shifting of the current population from one school to another, and I think the DeSmet kids will still look at SLUH as a viable option. I think it's great personally that they're doing it. I think number one, because it helps them, but I think it helps just the archdiocese as a whole, as some of these Catholic schools are shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. They're finding it a little bit more challenging to give these kids really what they need. It's not good for them. I mean, obviously, if they lose a lot of kids, they could close. But as the population continues to decline, we're going to see that happen, more and more. As far as we go, we just continue to reach out in the ways that we do and offer kids the ability to come to campus. St. Louis is unique in that all these kids are thinking about high school all the time. That helps us, because they're always thinking about it. Sometimes their parents are making them think about it. They're thinking about it earlier and earlier. And so we just are so blessed to enjoy the reputation we have, again, the excellent program and opportunities that we have for boys, so that families are always going to be inherently curious. But we just continue to participate in all the events that we can, where they'll come and look at different high schools, and again, give them good experiences on campus.
Let me ask you another question. More recent vintage, the COVID experience in 2020, 2021.
Yeah.
That had a major impact not only on St. Louis High, but every institution in terms of how do we get through those 18, 20 months. How did that affect your efforts? I mean, the kids who are in school, they were challenged to how to keep them here and
Yeah.
progress, but especially
Well,
the efforts that you had to make.
I have to tell you, in general, she can laugh about it, and I think we were just looking at each other like, okay, what are we gonna do?
Yeah, exactly.
And then I remember being at home, and I was sitting in my dining room creating a video tour from scratch with just pictures and slideshow kind of thing to put out there.
Yeah.
And then she and I are talking, and she was the one that finally said, Ann, we are gonna have to give personal tours. And so all summer long, we did one-on-one tours with families that wanted to come in and see the campus.
And
Wow.
with a student ambassador accompanying us as well, if
Yeah.
you remember.
Yeah, and
Just so
so-
that they had that touch point with one of our current students.
No, I don't think we had students.
we did.
Did we?
We
I don't
did.
remember having students,
We
but
did.
it was that just all summer long doing that. And then, how do you shadow? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
You're not going to let 8th graders in on a Zoom classroom with
Yeah.
high school boys.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. We wouldn't do it. And Ian Gibbons was our
Oh, yeah,
principal at the time.
yeah,
He said, no,
yeah.
no, 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 we're not doing that. So we created a whole, it really was a TV production of a shadow event where we had, showcasing classes, we had teachers on it, we had students come on it, and we would just facilitate this whole Zoom with 8th grade boys and their families as a way to shadow. I will tell you, our numbers were the lowest I had seen them that year. We didn't do open house, not gonna lie, I was really excited about that. Because we couldn't have
Yeah.
people here. We couldn't
Yeah,
have people
yeah.
on campus.
Well, that's why I asked the question. COVID had to be a
We just
huge
erased
challenge.
the whole admission season and
Yeah.
had it all on Zoom. And
Wow.
thankfully, I think we only admitted 230 that year or something like that, but that was fine.
Yeah.
That was fine.
We
So-
also got creative, once we were able to start having people on campus, do you remember that we created that Saturday event?
Oh, that was great. Yeah.
So we created a Saturday
really
event. It
good.
was almost kind of like speed dating SLUH for a morning.
Yeah.
And we welcomed in 8th grade students and broke them into smaller groups that were hosted by 2 of our student ambassadors for each group. And they got to sit in 20-minute classes of our 4 core class areas. And there were 2 groups per classroom, socially distanced, masked. And then also some social engagement opportunities with our student ambassadors to be able to begin exploring and being exposed to SLUH's culture and our instructional approach. And it was wildly successful, so much so that we're entertaining modifying it for 6th graders.
6th graders, wow.
Because 6th graders are beginning their high school consideration process, and of
That's what,
course,
yeah, you're saying.
all of
that's
our
high school,
competitors.
high school.
Yeah, all of our competitors are doing, more dog and pony shows when we still want to give that authentic experience as early as possible. So that's something that may occur.
You're
but
thinking of
was-
expanding the program then?
Well,
Or what did you call it?
would migrate from an event for 8th graders because we now have our shadow program that's very successful. We also have our 7th grade on-campus visit during the school day, which is very successful and productive.
Okay.
But how do we now begin introducing SLUH to 6th grade families?
Yeah.
And so we had 2 different events, one for parents, one for 6th graders, completely exclusive of one another, for 8th graders at the time, that we will now possibly explore creating and cultivating for 6th grade families'
yeah.
initial interest.
We haven't done it since COVID.
No,
I mean, we
but
haven't
it-
done
but
it
it was
since
very
then. But it was so
successful.
good.
Yes, it was
I would
successful
think,
that you might,
maybe
bring
we
it
could
back.
bring it back.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, the non-Catholic population of the student body has increased. How has that affected you? I mean, not that you're necessarily you're recruiting qualified students, period, but how does that affect, the non-Catholic families that you contact or show interest? I mean, first of all, do they ask about, well, as I understand it, all students have to take the theology courses. The non-Catholics aren't exempt from that, are they?
No.
So, is that not a problem, but what kind of inquiries or what's the process in terms of when you have non-Catholic families who are interested or show some curiosity about St. Lucie High? How does that work as opposed to I should say traditional Catholic, but I mean, when you're, you know, coming from, especially if you're coming from a Catholic grade school, I know you pointed out that many of the Catholics come from public school, but I'm talking about non-Catholics.
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, we do get about 20% of our student body who are non-Catholic. I think campus ministry started a few years ago sort of an orientation program for them so that they understand what their expectations are. They have to take theology. They'll still have to attend Mass, right?
They do have to.
So they'll help them understand how they can, you know, participate in what they're going to be doing there. But you know, they still can be in pastoral teams. They're going to do retreats and service. So all of those components
Well, that's the
are
thing.
still.
They are not I guess required. But I mean,
No, they're
like you say
required.
pastoral. I mean, the retreats, I know, and they are required. Each year now you have to have a retreat, don't you? Not just senior year?
Yes.
I mean, freshman, sophomore. Because I think when I was here, it was only a day of recollection.
Yeah,
The
right.
first couple of years, and then senior year, we would go to the White House. But now I
Yeah.
understand there's retreats every year.
Every year for
Correct.
So the non-Catholics participate in all of that.
They do.
Yes. I think it's also part of the conversation about how we're not trying to quote-unquote convert non-Catholics to become Catholics, though we have, in the last 2 years, had a very successful RCIA program. And this year there were 8 boys that were confirmed and in some cases received all of the preceding sacraments, baptism, etc. And that was at the leadership of Justin Kelly. I anticipate that that will continue. That said, we also talk with families who have other faith practices beyond Catholicism about how we're working to help their son deepen his own faith practices and find a closer relationship with God through the different programming that we offer here. And those 3 pillars are our liturgical services, our community service, and our retreat programming.
I was especially like with some of the Asian students and that who, be it, I mean, I know I've got some friends who are Indian and their sons have applied or shown interest in it, and they're not Catholic, you know, but that's interesting what you say. It's still a formation process, but not necessarily to become a Catholic, but to be oriented in their own faith or whatever.
Sure.
That's interesting. And I don't mean to press this mid-school thing, but is there any pressure for St. LSU High to start their own mid-school?
I mean, you know, Bob, I'm not really involved in those conversations.
Okay, I just wondered.
Yeah,
You know.
I have heard, you know, inklings of that. I think there are several people that would like to see that happen. From my perspective, personally, I don't know why we would do that. If you're
Well, it sounds like you're being very successful with these different efforts that you've.
You know, our Upward Bound summer program is fabulous, and
Yeah.
Tim Kurt and Steve Missy run that, and it's over 50 years strong, and the kids come here and they can kind of get a taste of a little bit of SLUH, but it's preparing them, you know, to be high school students and to learn how to study and do well. I think that I'm not hearing it now, so but who knows?
I remember when Dave Laughlin was here and we were, the archives program was evolving and we were talking about the future, and one of the guys he asked, because that was even before DeSmet now, I mean, that's been recent, but we were saying Chaminade and Pryor had this, is there any pressure? And he said, well, he didn't think the diocese or the archdiocese would approve that because of the potential effect on drawing kids away. So I was surprised when I read earlier or last year, or whenever it was, that the Smet got permission or whatever to start. But as you say, their numbers are down, and they have to have a feeder program to get their numbers back up.
I have a theory about that, and
What's that?
and I think my theory is that, you know, the archdiocese grade schools are, I don't want to say hurting. I think they've got a lot of challenges in front of them about getting kids to come to their schools, getting good teachers,
Keeping good
teachers, the whole, you know, thing of, you know, families are not going to church anymore. You know, there's a lot of challenges there. So why not let DeSmet help some of these schools and bring some of their kids in to help educate and clarify a little more for the schools where they're going to fit and make some decisions about that. Like the Archdiocese might be saying, well, let the SMET do that, and then we don't have to do it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
They're the reason we have to shut you down.
Yeah.
We're not the reason.
Yeah.
That said, I mean, I just feel as a school, whatever we can do to support the grade schools is really, really important right now to keep their kids educated and keep them strong. What that looks like, I don't know, but that would be a better approach than building a new building and staffing teachers and spending that money.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
No, well, that's why, I'm wondering, well, not just with, but I mean, the future, what concerns do you, and the fact that you've recently grown from the two of you to a third member of the staff indicates that there's a need for support in that, and I guess that was a good thing that the school was willing to fund a third position. I assume that was positive, that you must have put it in and said, we could use some help here because of the demands on our time.
Right.
So that's a positive thing, but I mean, where, as you look into the future, the next 4 or 5 years, what are your concerns in terms of, you mentioned, I mean, we keep talking about the demographics, that things of, we were talking about the demographics and the challenges.
Well, I'm talking about the financial component of sending your student to
how much
spending $100,000 on tuition for 4 years.
Tuition's what, almost 24,000, about 24,000 a year?
It's 25.
25
It's going to be
now,
25. So,
Wow.
We've increased our tuition, over the last couple of years significantly. And, I look at these families with 3 and 4 kids and
Oh,
go,
my God.
I'm glad I'm not you. Like, I just don't know how that,
I don't either. It's
continue.
amazing. I mean,
But it's funny because people don't really ask about it. They don't ask us about it. But again, we're so fortunate we have a financial aid situation that we can really help families.
Well, I think Dave Laughlin gets a lot of credit, because didn't he increase the financial aid from?
Well, it's going every year. We continue to.
I mean, I think at one point it was like 3.8 million, and now it's like 5 million that they take off the top, which is a big chunk of money.
Well, Dave's been gone now. How long has Dave been gone? Somebody was asking. 8 years.
7 years.
7 years.
Yeah.
So it's, Dave, of course, was always about that, and that was his priority, but it just has continued, to elevate. So
well, it's really almost a part of our culture now.
Yeah.
And definitely a part of the conversation when you're talking with families who are looking at multiple high schools in St. Louis. The wonder of how do we afford a school experience, private school experience, and we're fortunate to say that we have one of the most generous financial aid endowments in St. Louis, and that's a very it's a very powerful statement to be able to make.
Yes.
Yeah.
Getting back to the principals, you report to the principal. Is that your liaison usually?
To Father Stewart?
Well, whoever the principal.
Yeah.
My point is that with every change of administration, not only at school but in any organization, leadership changes, priorities change, personalities change in that. I mean, have you over the years, especially in recent years now, Father Stewart's newest principal is what, 1 year now? He's
Second
completed?
year.
And Father Gibbons, who is here, do you notice much change? Is what I'm getting at between a change in administration. Is it just a personnel?
Not really.
Not
I mean,
really?
I think again, we're always, because I'm always like, I want to make sure that we're delivering what I'm selling, right? So I always check in and say, we're still here, right? Because we're still really looking for that same strong student who tests well, who does well in the classroom, who has a broad range of interests and curiosities, who really can step right in. That hasn't changed from from John Moran to Father Gibbons to Father Stewart.
That stays constant.
That really has stayed constant. Some of the ways that we approach the committee and approach the data have changed over the last couple of years, and that's worked out really well. But it's pretty much still the same.
Let me ask you about your contact with the families and you just get the feeling that this is not going to be a good fit. I mean, the families, not just the family and the student. How do you handle that, or what do you do in terms of not encouraging, or I mean, I guess anybody can apply, but when you're getting negative vibes, thinking they're just not really interested, or St. Louis U High would not be a good fit for their son as a student. Is that a challenge?
You have to just tell them
Tell
about it.
them? Okay, that's
You
what
know,
I was wondering. I mean,
and we do.
honesty is the best policy.
Honesty is the only way you can do
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
We get, I'm thinking of one that we did last year that they had come in and interviewed, and I looked at their grades and test scores. I thought, oh my goodness. And I
Yeah.
called them right away and said,
Yeah.
hey, we don't, because at that point then, we now are requiring them to take a scholastic high school placement test after they have applied. So at this point, I'm not putting a kid through that if we know clearly this isn't going to be a fit.
Well, that's
and that's what it's so funny because I'm from St. Louis and I went to Nearings and I've been through the process and I took the test and the whole thing. And it's so hard because sometimes I wish it wasn't so much about I got admitted to as it's I'm a good fit for this school.
Yeah.
And if the kids could understand that, it would take that pressure and anxiety off of them so much. But it's just the process, and there's pros and cons to how we do it. But yeah, we have to have those conversations. And there are family, I tell parents, and we all have done it. You're either a parent that does not want your kid to get rejected. It would be just horrible. Oh my gosh, no way. Or you're a parent that can really have the conversation with your son that, hey, this isn't a given. You may not get in, and you've got to have that backup or that second choice. So.
And this differs probably a little bit since you first started in this role too, where we actually encourage families to apply to multiple high schools.
Oh, you do?
Yes. And that's because there is no guarantee. We don't have a crystal ball that says the admissions committee is going to give you a favorable admissions decision. If they feel like they need to have that backup plan, or there are other considerations that would factor into their decision of where their son will attend high school, then pursue admission at a couple of different high schools. Of course, we'd still like to be their number one.
Yeah.
But
When you and I did it, we had to fill out our second, third choice.
Yes.
Right? Remember, because it wasn't a given. You were getting in here.
But yes, that was a step,
Not too
yes.
much, but enough. But I had to
Yes.
do it too.
Yes.
And so it was like, okay, and that was the Archdiocese
Right.
program. It's kind of changed over the years because if you're applying here and you're not sure you're going to get in, you want to have a backup because there's also financial aid considerations. Like you might apply here, you might not get the aid that you need, and you say, okay, I'm not coming.
Yeah.
So that's really changed to where 20 to 30 kids are not going to accept their spot here, right?
Yeah.
That's different. It used to be,
Yes.
oh my God, I'm in.
Yeah.
Well, that's changed a lot over the years.
realistically, we're not done courting our future freshman class until after their admissions decisions are communicated and until after they've come for their welcome celebration. Our courtship continues all the way up until and through the enrollment contract deadline. It's not a foregone conclusion that SLUH can say, okay, we've admitted these kids and our
And they're
class
coming.
is done.
Yeah.
Two things. You mentioned the admissions committee. How is that composed, and what's the interaction between you and the three of you and the admissions committee?
So the committee is made up of our administration, principal, assistant principals, ourselves, and our student support director, Tim Kurt. So we're the core committee that really looks at the applications and evaluates them.
Okay.
I also have about, 10 or 15 interviewers that actually conduct all the interviews.
Are these members of
Of the faculty and staff administration. So it
okay.
used to be we all got together
Okay.
and met, but then when COVID hit, we couldn't. So I
Yeah.
said, well, we're not going to do all the interviewers. It's just going to be this core group of people. We sat in here, all distant, spaced or whatever the heck the term was. And then ever since then, it was like, that was really more efficient, so let's do it that way. And so we have that core group that meets. We get all the data, we put it all together, we present it to the committee, and then we all vote and make the decisions.
The other gentleman I was trying to contact you and Ann about the resurrection of this oral history thing, and I came into your office, and there were boys coming in for some kind of follow-up consult. I don't know, there was a program where you had boys coming in. What was that all about? Because you mentioned something about staying in contact with students once they were on the staff, or as students here.
Yeah.
What was that all about?
We have a number of different programs where our current students support our admissions efforts. Our
Support your admissions effort?
Yes, so we
Okay.
have our student ambassador program as well as our shadow host program.
Oh, I see,
The
okay.
boys, the boys can't just sign up for it. They
Right,
have
right.
to apply for it. It's not a foregone conclusion that if you served in the role previously,
You get
that
it
you will be
automatically.
admitted back
I
into the
see.
program.
I
It's
see.
based on academic performance, it's based on behavior, minor infractions on their disciplinary record, engagement with our prospective families, and choices that they make in how they deliver themselves and represent the school. And so the application process for admissions ambassadors occurs the end of the school year for the preceding year, and then they actually serve in that role for the subsequent academic year. The shadow hosts who served as shadow hosts as freshmen can also express interest in returning as shadow hosts as sophomores, because only freshmen and sophomores can serve in that role.
I see.
We then also open up the application to incoming freshmen when they begin their freshman year experience, but all of them are taken through some formal programs and orientations and training. New this coming year is a Distinguished Ambassador program for which we only have 20 spots. And those are our student ambassadors who will represent SLUH at off-campus and on-campus admissions events, directly interacting with feeder school principals, doing more public speaking roles versus
But
the
they're trained for
one-on-one.
that,
But
you're saying.
they sit through a 3-hour training session, and even if they've been an ambassador in the past, they're required to go through training every single year. Shadow hosts equally have an orientation to be reviewed on behavior expectations and what the format of the day looks like and how they're paired up with their guests and how to treat their guests. Because you can't assume that just because they're junior bills, they possess the social skills or the social filters on how to behave.
I see.
And Jen does a marvelous job of that. That was kind of something she did in a past career. But I will say, you know, when I look, and I don't bash anyone else's program, but when I look at our boys versus the other boys representing out there, I think they're a notch above. I really do, because they've been trained. We make them wear the jackets and the ties and the whole thing, and there's something to be said for that, even still in this world that we're living in. So
Well, I think that's wonderful,
it's important.
because as an old codger, I mean, no, it's really refreshing when you meet, and I'm not just talking about St. Louis U High, but the fact that you do a thorough training program. I think a lot of times, not just students and that, but people are not trained for the role that they're expected to fulfill, and unless you give them the kind of training and screening that you explained, I think that's wonderful that you make that kind of effort, and I'm sure it pays dividends, because when they go out, they're doing a good job instead of a mixed job in terms of representing
Well, nobody
the
wants to
school.
fail.
Please?
Nobody wants to fail, right?
No.
And so these boys are very eager to have these leadership opportunities, and SLUH is a wonderful place to provide countless leadership opportunities through our clubs and our athletics and through some more, other organizations like we have. But we want to position them for success, and we want to position them to set themselves apart from their peers, both in this building as well as outside of this building.
I think that's wonderful that you had that program. I mean, I've heard the terms, but I didn't know about the process that, and it's selective, like you say. It isn't just volunteer.
Right.
You know, it's okay. I've got to ask one last question, Jen.
Sure.
You're not from St. Louis, and
No.
Ann says she's a Narragansett grad and gal. But how did you first learn about St. Louis U High when you came to the St. Louis area, may I ask?
So I am a proud graduate of the St. Louis U High of Chicago.
Okay.
I graduated from St. Ignatius College Prep. My class was the first co-ed class to go all 4 years at Ignatius and graduate.
Okay.
So I have a very, very committed relationship with Jesuit education.
Okay.
I do believe that it is that experience that has shaped who I am as an adult. I was wildly disappointed when I moved to St. Louis and there wasn't the opportunity for my daughter to have a Jesuit high school experience, but she made me proud and went on to a Jesuit college.
Oh, good.
And my son has become a successful young man because of his St. Louis U High
He attended
experience.
here.
Yes. So life kind of came full circle for me. I had a great college experience, but it was my high school Jesuit educational experience that shaped who I am, and I firmly believe that there's
shared
nothing.
that viewpoint. I thought
There's nothing that
was
compares.
really formative, the 4 years here, so.
Yeah.
Is there any other topics that I haven't raised that you want to bring up? I mean, in terms of the whole admissions effort, I think you're both to be commended for what I consider to be a really admirable job and a tough job to keep in this day and age with the challenges that we've talked about, some of the things in it.
It's pretty easy, Bob, with the product we sell.
Well, I don't think it's easy. I think you're to be commended, though,
Yeah,
for
we have a good product.
your
That
effort, and
helps.
I really mean that, because I think
Thank
when I
you.
see that St. Louis U High, and then to recover from COVID, which was a huge challenge. I mean, and now the numbers are, again, is a tribute to your efforts in that, so.
Well, I think it's realistic for us to say it takes the village of SLUH.
Yes,
We understand that 6th, 7th, 8th grade boys, they're going to hear what we say about this much.
yeah,
But having the opportunity to interact with our students and
Yeah,
have
that's
that boots on the
really-
ground
yeah.
experience here
Right.
is really what differentiates their opinion of what they hear versus what they experience.
yeah.
And it takes the current families, current faculty, staff, as well as alumni, and word of mouth being our most powerful marketing tool.
For sure, yeah. It's
Well, I
not,
think you're to be
we're the conduit. I call us the conduit to all of everything
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
And as long as we keep that in front of families, then it's pretty, you know, think about bringing somebody into Rich Moran's class, or bringing somebody into Dick Wayner's class,
Yeah.
or whatever. Like the parents walk out and they're just like, oh my gosh, I wish I could go.
Yeah.
You know, because there's such enthusiasm from
Right.
everybody in
Right.
the building, so
Well, I want
it's
to
easy.
thank both of you for participating
Well, thanks for
in the
having
oral
us. It's been
history
fun.
project, which we're continuing, and thank you for your efforts on behalf of St. Louis U High. I really mean that. It's admirable work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Thanks for having us.